Hello, everybody, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Friday, November 13th, 2020. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler-filled conversation about the third episode of Disney Plus's The Mandalorian Season 2, The Heiress. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta, and joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
And special guest from Star Wars Insider, StarWars.com, the Fullest Sith podcast, and a little site called SlashFilm.com, Bryan Young.
That sounds like me.
Yeah. Okay, so last week we talked about Chapter 10, and there was a couple things that happened there. We got some clarifications on. There was those spiders that were inspired by the Ralph McQuarrie painting from Empire Strikes Back. We were theorizing that they might be the Krykna from Star Wars Rebels, but I think we got clarification that it's not exactly the same species.
Yeah, Phil Shostak from Lucasfilm came out and said that while they are not the same species, they are both definitely inspired by the same piece of Ralph McQuarrie art. So, they're definitely mining that territory, even in the smallest of things. It was interesting. I don't know if you looked, but the the pre-production art that they showed during the credits of the last episode. If you look at the pre-production art of that spider, next to the Ralph McQuarrie painting, you can see that they just digitally lifted that entire spider into a new environment for the pre-production art. So
That's funny.
It's exactly the same one. They just photoshopped one into the other. So, but yeah, so it's still from the same source, and maybe they're related the same way Vulcans and Romulans are, but maybe that's mixing my metaphors.
Another clarification we got is on the ice planet they were on. We were coming up with theories that it could be Ilum, which I don't think is none of us actually believe that. We just floated that as a fun thing. But Brad, I think we actually learned what the planet is.
Yeah, so if you were paying close attention during the episode, you can actually see on the display of the Razor Crest that there's some Arabesh, the Star Wars text that can be translated. And a fan took the time to look at it, and they were able to figure out that the ice planet in question from that episode is Maldo Kreis. There was some confusion because some people thought that this was the same planet that Mando was on, a similar ice planet early in the first season, I believe in the first episode even. But it turns out that planet is not Maldo Kreis, but this one in the most recent episode is.
Yeah, wires got crossed or something happened. But
lots of ice planets out there.
Yeah. What else do we have to talk about from last week's episode? Let's talk about. Tom L. wrote in, and he asked this question: did you guys find it odd that Mando kept Zero's body on board the Razor Crest? I'm still trying to unpack that decision. For instance, was it a character-based choice or a writer-based choice? The former could yield something at some point, but I am not sure I trust Favreau. That is, some of Mando's actions may not say anything about Mando's personality. What do you think? So I guess he's asking that because Mando at that point did not like droids, so why would he have kept the droid's body?
Maybe because it's a more, I don't know, valuable droid, and maybe if he ever needed to trade it or something, that he could use it that way, or even use its parts for something.
Or it could have even been that he could have been maybe thinking about trading a bounty in on it. I mean, as a bounty hunter, usually he could have a bounty on it. But he ran into Zero, and all of that business happened with Zero before Quill had died. And so maybe part of it was also offering, maybe he would have planned on letting Quill have it, or Quill was using it and repairing IG-11. And it just was leftover detritus from all of that situation.
And I also think he was decommissioned, right? There was no way that droid was going to come back to life unless someone rewired it, which they did. So it's not there's nothing to be afraid of.
Well, and technically, he's not necessarily back to life even when the Frog Lady activates him. It's basically like she took a human head and is talking through it.
Yeah, for sure. A lot of people were really, I don't know, freaked out about about Baby Yoda eating the eggs. like way more than I thought when I brought up that concern to you guys last week. Like there was lots of articles online of people just like, he's committing genocide.
I think
Basically these headlines. What did you guys think of that reaction?
I think what happened was there were some people that I saw online that had some really legitimate concerns, right? Like they were women who had experienced miscarriages or infertility, and it was really sensitive for them to see the child consuming those eggs, right? Like women who have been through in vitro fertilization, like every one of those eggs is super valuable, and once you have them, there is a finite number of them, and what happens if you run out, and what happens if she ran out because of Baby Yoda. And I don't think that it was like, I don't think the complaints were like, hey, this is awful and everything needs to be canceled. It was like,
Yeah.
Hey, like this is something that we should pay attention to. And then people started picking up on it, and there were a lot of people who just kind of built on some of that. They viewed that as like, oh, these people are just online rage, pushing back against Lucasfilm, which I don't think anybody necessarily. I don't think anybody at Lucasfilm necessarily felt like they were being attacked or anything. And some websites picked up some very snarky titled articles about it, and it just sort of snowballed from there. And then people online started making fun of it, not really investigating further into what the issue was, the people who were actually genuinely sort of disturbed by it. And it just kind of turned into like, look at these crazy Star Wars fans being crazy. But I don't think the origin of that was actually that crazy.
Yeah, I think how you explained it, how it, like the snowball rolled down the hill, is basically how it happened. I also do an Ordinary Adventures live chat every Saturday afternoon about this week's Mandalorian episode, and during that live chat, someone in the chat room brought up a possibility of what could have happened with Baby Yoda and the eggs. It didn't come true. So it ended up being not like a theory that didn't end up panning out. But I wanted to bring it up to you guys because I've already talked about this with Brad. I know that that basically the person had a theory that Baby Yoda wasn't actually eating the eggs because we didn't see him chewing the eggs. He was like just swallowing them whole. And thus he sensed that something was going to go wrong. Something bad was going to happen to the eggs. So he was actually storing them. He was saving some of the eggs of this, her last batch, her last lifeline of her kind or her bloodline. And that in this episode, the eggs would get destroyed, and then we would see Baby Yoda, David Blaine style. If you've seen him regurgitate the frogs, regurgitate the eggs to save the day. I don't know why, but I like as these headlines came out of like the genocide headlines and stuff like that, I started to start believing this crazy theory. What do you guys think about that theory?
I mean, it's definitely a fun theory, and I wish it is something that they actually would have done, because there is like foundation in real amphibians where there's an Australian frog where they swallow fertilized eggs and they remain in the female's stomach undigested until they hatch as tadpoles, and then she regurgitates them alive. So that would have been an interesting thing for them to do, and I wish that it would have been just so that the complaints were like, oh, okay, well now we understand. But yeah, I mean, at the same time, I feel like he's a child, and how many times do children put things in their mouth that they know they're not supposed to, and like it's not really a malicious thing. He's just a kid, even though he's a 50-year-old kid.
If they had gone that way, though, I think it would have demonstrated that he knows a little bit more than what we think. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think you're right. I think he's a child and he doesn't know any better. But it would have been interesting to have that swerve of like, oh, he's more aware of what's going on than we think. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
And lastly, the only other thing I wanted to bring up. Two things. We learned that Carl Weathers is directing next episode. I think episode 4 of the season. So that's interesting. And also there's this meme going around. I'm not sure if you guys saw it, but it was like the Frog Lady's Uber review. She gave 1 star. Said the driver nearly got arrested. Took 5 hours to get to the destination. We crashed at least 3 times with no seatbelt. Also, his weird green dog kept eating my eggs. I don't know.
Yeah.
I found that hilarious. Okay, let's get to chapter 11 because I think we've gone on enough about chapter 10. So this is directed by Bryce Dallas Howard. It's written by Jon Favreau. I'll give you my quick thoughts here. I was nervous because Bryce Dallas Howard directed my least favorite episode of this series in season 1, the Seven Samurai kind of episode. This is a big improvement over her season 1 episode. I would venture to say that this might be the best episode so far of the series. So, in my mind, Bryce Dallas Howard has directed the best and the worst episodes of The Mandalorian, which is kind of crazy. I almost want to be mad that this episode is 35 minutes. The first was 54, the second was 41. This is much shorter, but it was so good. And what was it that George Lucas used to give us direction, like faster and more intense?
Yeah.
I feel like that's what this episode was. It was faster and more intense in like a good way. I'm not, making fun of it. Had some fun appearances, asked some interesting questions, added some lore to, the Mandalorians. And I think it's sending the season in an interesting direction. Brad, what did you think?
Yeah, I love this episode as well. It definitely ranks among my favorite. I'm not sure if it's my absolute favorite, but it's easily in at least like the top 3 of the entire series so far. And I actually didn't see that Bryce Dallas Howard directed this episode until it was over when the credits started rolling. So I was like, oh, okay, that's surprising. And she definitely improved, especially when it comes to the action, because I think that her directing of action in the episode that she directed in the first season was a big problem of what I had of how she showed her skills as a director. But here, the action is fantastic, and there's a lot going on, a lot to take in, and I think this is probably the biggest progression of the overarching plot and character arc that we've had for Mando and other characters in this series. And we're definitely getting to the point where like things are starting to heat up for this season, and I'm really excited to see where this takes us.
Bryan, what did you think?
I think the sort of cause and effect quest chain of this season is really helping give this season an overall focus that maybe the first season lacked a little bit. Like the first season felt a little bit all over the place, and this season feels like a journey. And I really loved that about this episode. And I really liked this episode for how I feel like it stood on its own as a really great action set piece, but also how it ties into the broader Star Wars universe, which I'm sure we'll talk a lot about more over the course of the rest of the next, over the course of the podcast. But to tag up on some of Bryce Dallas Howard's work, like I think this had some of the best visual storytelling that we've seen on the show. I really loved the way she designed the editing around some of the gags, but also some of the juxtapositions, right? I really loved the way they built the editing and the audio and just the performances in general around the cargo control room gag. I really loved the way that she was able to juxtapose the child versus the violence. And I think a lot of that has to do with the score and its juxtaposition in the two moments. But there was a lot of really sort of next level filmmaking that was going on here that wasn't necessarily on display in episode 4 and of the first season. But I will say, like, I really love that they just keep sticking Bryce Dallas Howard with the fishing village aesthetic. And I hope that they just keep that going. Like maybe next season, if she directs another episode, it almost has to be in a fishing village.
Yeah, it has to be a fishing metropolis, like a fishing city.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's talk. This episode starts with an almost lifeless Razor Crest drifting down towards a planet. It's barely holding together, and one engine is boosting. It lands without all the usual systems, and the ship almost finds its home on the dock, but narrowly falls into the water. I love how, first of all, I don't think we've ever seen in Star Wars, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it was in the animated series, but I don't think we've ever seen like a ship entering the atmosphere and seeing it with the flames around it, kind of like we see with like the space shuttles and the what do you call that one?
Revenge of the Sith.
Is it in Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah, when
the capital, the Invisible Hand, Grievous's ship,
falls to Coruscant, yeah.
And the fire ships come in and say, like, we're putting the fire out, and then they were coming in too hot.
I am totally wrong then. But I don't know. I like the whole visuals here. The title of the episode, The Heiress. Again, this continues the in the line of titles of the at the beginning of the episodes. There's only been 2 episodes that didn't have the in it. This past week, the Rotten Tomatoes had a list of titles for the season. Many people thought it leaked onto Rotten Tomatoes. This confirms that it did not leak, because this does not match up with The Bounty, which was the title on Rotten Tomatoes. So that is false.
I mean, if I were coming up with generic titles for this show, The Bounty would certainly be on that list.
Yeah. So who is the heiress?
I think there's 2 people that are the heiress, and I think that this is one of those things that I really loved about this episode was the thematic juxtapositions between Bo-Katan, Kryze, played by Katie Sackhoff, but I think in another way, thematically, the heiress is also the tadpole that the frog lady has birthed, and that both of them are obsessed with their line and what that means. And when Bo-Katan talks about that she's the end of her line, she turns to revenge and trying to right that wrong in some way that's not going to extend her line. The frog lady does the opposite. She chooses peace and trying to extend it. And so I think that the title actually works just as well for that tadpole or the frog lady as it does with Bo-Katan.
That is fantastic reading. Okay, so we see this almost like an at like walking vehicle, but it has a crane and it pulls the ship out of the water, which is, I'm not sure if this is intentional, but I used to live in San Francisco, and when I lived there, everybody used to tell me in the bay over by Oakland, there's these like cranes at the dock that supposedly inspired George Lucas to create the ATs or AT-ATs, whatever you want to call them. When I talked to George Lucas for the Clone Wars animated movie, he confirmed to me that those did not inspire him. But it was like a widespread like myth. It was like, if you go to San Francisco or the Bay Area, it's something that everybody there living there always tells people. So I'm wondering if this is kind of like a nod to that. What do you think, Brian?
That was my assumption, actually. In fact, when I wrote up my piece for Slash Film, I was looking for that rumor because I've heard it a trillion times, and I don't live in the Bay Area. And the article I found to link in my piece was actually a piece you wrote in 2008 debunking that. But I've heard that sort of thing, and I've heard Phil Shostak, who works with the art team on The Mandalorian, talk about that specifically, and he's debunked that on Twitter before. And so I know the team on The Mandalorian is aware of that, and so I could very easily see that being a very fun wink and a nod to those people, because it looks very much like those cargo containers cargo container cranes for exactly the same reason that you would have it in that port on Trask.
Yeah. Side note to that, there is also, after that being debunked, there are some people out there that say that some of the artists at Lucasfilm and ILM, that they all live in the Bay Area, and that while George has debunked that they're based on those things at the dock in Oakland, that some of the artists that might have contributed to the look of the AT-ATs might have been inspired. So whatever. So what is this planet that they land on? Is this what they talked about in the previous episode, Trask? Or it's the moon of Trask?
Yeah, the black market port of Trask, as Bo-Katan refers to it, and this is a new planet in Star Wars, and it's full of water, which makes sense for the locale that has decided to settle there. Whether it's frog people, who really should get names both as a species and as characters, especially since they were so vital to the story of this episode and last.
It is
But
funny because I watch this show with subtitles on because often they actually give you names of people that aren't spoken on air in the episodes, but it always just referred to as the frog lady or the frog man. So it's weird that they didn't give them names.
And then the rest of the people there are Mon Calamari and Corrins, who are both native to the planet Mon Cala, which we saw quite a bit in Clone Wars, with a lot of significant war going on there. But this seems like a much more rough and tumble group of these people, and maybe a little bit less technologically advanced than maybe the Mon Calamari that joined up with the rebellion.
Yeah. So on this planet, Mando pays a Mon Calamari to fix his ship. Well, let's talk about this setting here. It's like this cool, looking dock on a water planet. Have we seen anything like this in Star Wars before? I don't think we have.
Revenge of the Sith. No, I'm just kidding. No, I think you're right. I think the closest we might have come is Sorgan from Bryce Dallas Howard's last episode. We haven't seen a lot of fishing villages. Maybe the closest would be Luke Skywalker's fishing in The Last Jedi, but nothing like this. It looks like a combination of something out of Robert Altman's Popeye or Pirates of the Caribbean, like Tortuga, but with that Star Wars aesthetic. And yeah, I just don't think we've seen a whole lot like this. We haven't seen a whole lot of boats in Star Wars either.
So the frog lady reunites with her husband. It's a really sweet moment. And he thanks Mando and directs him to the inn to find people who look like him. By the way, I'm not sure if I said this in the last episode, but I want Disney to release an aquarium that looks like a replica of the frog lady's egg incubator. So I'm putting that out there. Let's make it happen. Okay, so we see what is her actual name? She's Sasha Banks in WWE. What is the actress's name? Do you know?
What WWE character?
Sasha Banks.
So it's credited. The character is Mercedes Varnado.
Okay, so that's her real name then.
Yeah.
Or her state. I don't know. Is Mercedes a real name? Maybe. Okay. She's seen there in a hood, watching from across the way, and then is gone. I remember when the trailer came out, people thought that she was going to be playing Sabine because she normally has this dyed hair in her wrestling personality. So, okay, we're in the inn, which is basically another cantina. Every planet we go to on Mandalorian, we go to a cantina, and Mando orders some chowder for the child and offers some money to the waiter to help find more of his kind. First of all, I think it's interesting here that we see a little bit of a callback because Mando, I'm not sure if you remember this, but in season 1, the beginning of season 1, he was paid for one of the bounties in some Mon Calamari currency. And we actually
calamari flan, yeah.
Yeah, we get to see him using it here. So that's kind of fun. And I love that the bowls in this place are filled up with a hose that comes from the ceiling. Why can't we get a place like this in Galaxy's Edge? I want to eat soup that comes from a hose in the ceiling.
That would be rad. Didn't they have a dinner theater sort of situation planned and then ditched it, or they've incorporated it into the Galactic Star Cruiser?
But I think it was a more of a high-end thing, so I don't think we'll ever get to.
I don't know. This spouts from the ceiling pumping out chowder seems pretty high-end to me, Peter.
Imagine if you were eating your chowder and this animatronic puppet came out of it, like a tentacle puppet. I don't know. Okay, I'm asking too much here. The child begins to eat his chowder, and an octopus-like creature jumps out at Baby Yoda and grabs his face, almost like a face hugger, an alien. And Mando says, "Don't play with your food," which I think is so funny. So an alien guy approaches and offers to bring Mando to other Mandalorian, but it's a few hours out by boat. What species did you say this was, Brian?
These are Korran. These were first seen in Return of the Jedi. One of Jabba's henchmen was a Korran named Tessek, and he was the action figure everybody had from that species because that was the only one they made. And they live on Mon Calamari with the Mon Cals, and they don't get along very well. So it looks like they're getting along much better here now than they were on their home planet, which also, also referred to as Dak. I'm not sure if that's the planet name that's a little bit more friendly to the Korran because they aren't necessarily excluded from that the way they are when everybody calls it Mon Cala, but whatever.
Interesting. Okay, so we see them on a boat with a bunch of Quarrens. One of them asks Mando, "Have you ever see a Mama Core eat?" Is Mama Core a new creature? I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Yeah, this seems new. I mean, we haven't seen a whole lot of aquatic creatures, and this was its first appearance, as far as I can tell.
And what are the Quarrens doing with this Mama Core in the, like, what is that, like the hull of the ship? I don't know what you call that area.
I mean, I think they're doing the same thing with it that they would do. Like, why does Jabba have a pit with a Rancor in it?
Good point. Okay, so they lower some fish into the water hole in the center of the ship and feed the creature, but this was all like a ruse of some kind. They throw the child in, and he is in his prem, and he's eaten by the creature. Mando jumps in to save the child, and as he does so, they close the cage on top of him, and it turns out that they just wanted the Beskar from his armor, so they were using him. I guess should Mando have known this was a trap when he got to this planet and saw the Mon Calamari on the dock? Sorry, had to ask. Okay, three Mandalorians land on the boat, coming to the rescue. They open the cage and pull Mando out. I also noticed here that the way they pull him out from the water, reaching their hand out, seems to be a visual callback to Chapter 8, the flashback of Mando as a child being saved by the Mandalorians. Like, they pulled him out of that, like, little bunker, or that...
Yeah. I also thought it was sort of designed to really give a close-up of both of the insignias on their hands, on their gloves, too. Because I think that was a giveaway that was Bo-Katan at that point as well.
Yeah. Mando tells her the creature has the child. One of them jumps in. We see some flashes down below, and she flies out of the water and presents Mando back with the child. I think it's worth noting here that the child's prim seems to be completely destroyed, and without who rebuilt it last season? Was it Quill? So I don't think Quill's around. So
he might be. He might be out of luck, or buy a new one. Need to buy a new one.
Let me just say too that shot of him getting kicked into the mouth was like such a jarring, shocking, terrifying thing. You're like, oh no!
It was out of nowhere, and
that overhead shot of the baby getting sucked into the Mama Core too was perfect. Yeah. It was just, it felt very much like an homage to the Sarlacc pit shots. And it was, frightening. Like, I didn't necessarily expect the double cross, and it was well received when it happened. Yeah,
so we have 3 Mandalorians here. I don't know how you guys want to approach this. I guess let's say Mando is surprised, believing well, he's surprised because they remove their masks, and that's not something the Mandalorians do, or at least that's not something that Mando thinks Mandalorians do. So he's surprised, and he believes that it might be like Cobb Vanth, and asks them, where did you get that armor? And they explain they've had the armor for 3 generations, and he says, "You are not Mandalorian." So I guess the question is, Brian, who are these Mandalorians?
So, Bo-Katan Kryze is the sister of Satine Kryze, who used to be the ruler of Mandalore. Bo-Katan used to be the ruler of Mandalore as well. Bo-Katan also used to be a member of Death Watch, which was a splinter sect that wanted to return Mandalore to its warrior ways. She refers to the sect of Mandalorians that Din Djarin is part of, sort of almost, disparagingly as the children of the Watch, and sort of calls them religious zealots who don't even want to go back to the old ways, but the ancient ways. And so Bo-Katan and these her Night Owl companion, who is Cosca Reeves, which is the Sasha Banks character, they have these Night Owl sorts of helmets, and Night Owls were Bo-Katan's sort of all-female cadre in the Death Watch and beyond that, who helped put together the coalition that helped win her Mandalore and the Darksaber in the Rebels TV series. I feel like we've gotten really into the weeds here, and I blame myself. But
you did say that it was a female group, and there is a male here.
Well, so he doesn't have the Night Owl like helmet. He's wearing a normal Mando helmet. The Night Owls are sort of marked by the shape of the eyes are more like owl sorts of eyes on their helmet. And you'll notice that's part of that. But as leader of Mandalore, she was followed by everyone, not just her Night Owls.
Okay, one other thing I wanted to bring up in this conversation is the male. I think his name is Axe Wolves? Something.
Axe Woves.
Woves? He says he is one of them, and which Bo-Katan replies, Dank Ferrick, which is something we've heard before. We heard about that in chapter 1 of the series. That blue alien guy said it when they were escaping, and I thought at the time that meant thank God. But I don't think that means thank God now, right? He's one of them. Thank God. I don't know. I don't feel like that. Like I don't feel like he's happy about it.
The context I got, because Mando uses it earlier in this episode as well. He uses it right at the beginning as they're going to crash, and he kind of says it. And from the context of the 3 times it's appeared in Star Wars, I get the impression it's sort of a little bit of a catch-all phrase that means anything between thank God and Jesus Christ, right?
Okay.
It kind of captures all of that nuance depending on how it's delivered, and it gets delivered in context both ways. So I searched around to see if there's any official translation of it, and there's not. But just based on going back and looking at that context for all 3 uses of it, that's my best guess, at least based on how it's used.
Okay, so like you said, she informs him that she is Bo-Katan of the clan's Kryze, born on Mandalore and fought in the Purge. She's the last of her line. As you mentioned earlier, this is kind of a mirror in some ways, a reverted mirror of the Frog Lady. So that's kind of interesting.
It also bodes well, or not well. It bodes ill for Corky Kryze, who was her nephew and Satine's nephew, who was a young man on Mandalore during the Clone Wars series. This implies that he didn't make it out.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. Probably during the Night of the Thousand Tears, right? So this is interesting because it establishes that there's still bloodborne Mandalorians out there after the Night of the Thousand Tears, or the Purge, or whatever you want to call it. Is that the same thing? I'm assuming it's the same thing, right?
I think my guess is the Purge is the overall campaign, and the Night of a Thousand Tears was either the very beginning of it or the end of it.
So she explains he was a child of the Watch, a cult of religious zealots who broke away from the Mandalorian society with the goal to reestablish the ancient way. Night of the Watch, does that mean Death Watch?
I think they're a splinter group of Death Watch, right? Where Death Watch was like, yeah, we're going to bring everything back to our warrior past. And then there was people like the Armorer who was like, screw you guys. You're still taking off your helmets and you're not the true, we're the Reformation Church of Mandalore, really. And they took off to do that because there were definitely Vizslas involved, like Pre-Vizsla and Paz-Vizsla. So there's probably some connection there. We saw that they had Death Watch insignias when they rescued Din Djarin in the first place, and so my guess is it's very much that there was a split between Death Watch and the Children of the Watch, and they and even the name implies like, hey, we were born out of Death Watch. We're the Children of the Watch, but we're the one true, faith. This is the way, and broke off on their own, especially when you take into account that Death Watch, Bo-Katan was from Death Watch and Pre-Vizsla was from Death Watch, and they all had no problems taking off their helmets. So seeing that more orthodox strand hiding out a little more, it makes sense to me.
I forget who said this, but we heard last season one of the creatives, or maybe even Bob Iger, said that it was going to get more like Game of Thrones-ish, and I'm starting to feel that here. Okay, so Mando is not down with this. He takes off with the child. Brad, what do you think about, there's a lot being dropped here. What do you think about the expansion of the Mandalorian lore here? And yeah, what do you think this means for the future of the series?
I mean, I like the complexity that it adds here. It, creates the possibility that there might be, warring factions among the Mandalorians, much in the same way, that we see extreme behavior among, real life religious organizations, here in our society. There are some who are much more, considerably more conservative than others who are more progressive, and it could turn out to be an interesting way to sort of represent real life moral and ethical quandaries that exist between various religious organizations. So I think that's definitely interesting, on top of the fact that, like you said, this sort of Game of Thrones dynamic of Bo-Katan trying to take back her rightful place as the leader of Mandalore and get everybody back together, and so you have to wonder, whether Din Djarin will be drawn to, who these other Mandalorians are that he's not aware of, or if he'll, and if he'll struggle with remaining loyal to those who raised him and saved him, and essentially gave him his code. So, it's definitely making Mando that much more of an interesting character, because so far, we've learned a little bit of his backstory, but he hasn't been super interesting as a character. He's had little developments here and there, but he's not too dissimilar from, what we recognized Boba Fett to be, just this badass bounty hunter. And he's obviously softened his heart because of the child and his relation, his similarities that he shares as far as his past being abandoned and not having anyone to take care of him until he was saved. And then we've seen him evolve as far as his perception of droids, at least somewhat. But I think this, stands to be probably the most interesting change as far as what's happening in his life and how he perceives the world and the Mandalorians around him.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of presented with, evidence or like that, Mandalorians aren't necessarily the way that he believed them to be. It's challenging his beliefs, and he seems really unwilling to even consider that as a possibility. He storms off, so there's only one way, the way of the Mandalorians, and like storms off, right? So I wonder, will he come to a place where he like realizes that maybe Mandalorians is something in between what the ancients believed and what the real blooded Mandalorians that are still alive believe, and maybe I kind of believe that we're going to end off there, because I believe that at one point, Pedro's going to like not have his helmet on for a good portion of this show anymore, but I could be wrong.
If not, I heard he's walking.
And I don't think that's based on those rumors. I just think that it makes sense, right? Like it makes sense to eventually have the human show. I don't know.
Well,
But
I think what's interesting about it is that the armorer tells him to seek out other Mandalorians, and he does. And as he's learning about other Mandalorians, he's learning about the rich variety of the culture that he didn't know anything about because he was inculcated in one specific flavor of that culture, and he's going to have to come to terms with that. And I'm not sure he necessarily likes Bo-Katan's brand. I think he feels very bullied into taking the mission and then taking it further than he wants, and he doesn't necessarily trust her word because she's not as firm or resolute in what her word means as he might be, or how he might perceive the creed to be. But whether or not he would unite under Bo-Katan as ruler of Mandalore or try to install maybe the armorer or even himself in that role is anybody's guess, and maybe that's where this is heading.
I think you also have to wonder too, maybe how much the armorer or any other Mandalorians know about this other sect still being out there. Maybe they all really still think that they're gone, because you would think that maybe she would not be so, willing to tell Din Djarin, go find other Mandalorians, knowing that he could very well find what she would conceive as the wrong Mandalorians.
But she also was in a situation where, like, it looked like they were all pretty much dead. Everybody else, very few of them escaped. She stayed to fight off the last of them. And so if it's sort of her last breath of like, listen, the Children of the Watch are pretty much over, we need to go out and meet other Mandalorians and bring them back together. One of the great stories in Mandalorian history and legends, right, is of Mandalore the Uniter, who brought all of the clans together under one roof originally. And that was something that was really central to Bo-Katan's story in Rebels, where you had a few different factions of Mandalorians sort of vying for that control in the time of the Empire, where some were willing to sell it out to the Empire, some were trying to stay honorable and neutral and pacifist, and others were trying to fight against that. And Bo-Katan was able to sort of unite them into something that I think is what led to the Purge.
Okay, we need to get back to the episode. We see this beautiful wide shot with 3 Mandalorians jetpacking from the ship and it blowing up with the sun setting in the background. It looks, absolutely beautiful. I feel like this season in particular, even more so than last season, I can really feel the amazing concept art being translated into the live action almost like perfectly. Like, I feel like there's more like shots. I'm like, oh, that definitely was like, a piece.
Every frame a painting.
Yes. The Quarrens confront and surround Mando on the docks. He asked for passage, but they want revenge for the death of his brother. I guess this is a question for you, Bryan. I heard the Quarrens on the ship all calling each other brother. This guy is mad because, Mando killed his brother. Are the Quarrens all related, or do they just refer to each other as brothers?
We haven't had a whole lot of exposure with them. So maybe all of these guys, or maybe it's just a really big family. The first time I watched the episode, I don't do it with subtitles on the first time. I do it the second time with subtitles while I'm writing my piece. Yeah. And I thought he called the Mama Corps the Mama Corrin, and I was like, this could be really interesting. Maybe they are all brothers or something.
That'd be funny.
Yeah. But maybe it's just this group of them. Who knows?
Yeah. Okay. So the 3 Mandalorian come to his aid. They say, "Can we at least buy you a drink?" Now we're back at the inn, and it is explained to Mando that Trask is a black market port, and they're staging weapons built with the plunders from Mandalore. They have a plan to seize the weapons and use them to retake their homeworld and put a Mandalorian on the throne. Mando says that Mandalore is cursed. Anyone who goes there dies. Once the Empire knew they couldn't control it, they made sure that no one else could either. And Bo-Katan says, "Don't believe everything you hear." What do you think actually happened here? I mean, I'm guessing we're gonna learn more about this, but this is all like new territory, right? Like, we don't really know what is going on in Mandalore at this time or what happened to it.
Correct. And it sounds like what happened was in Rebels, they were already working on sort of super weapons that could attack just Mandalorians with the weapon called the Duchess that Sabine Wren had designed, but she exploded it so that they wouldn't be able to use it against the Mandalorians. And once the Imperial loyalists had been killed by Sabine and that group, and they turned the Darksaber over to Bo-Katan, the last thing we see is that them being united and willing to fight against the Empire in support of the rebellion, which they'd done in very small ways through Rebels. They helped at the Battle of Adelon to help the Rebels escape to Yavin, so that they were able to build that base up there. And this finally brought them all together near the end of the series. And so my guess is what happened is they brought other super weapons there to either irradiate the planet or commit a genocide. But this is the same thing they did with Geonosis, right? The Geonosians knew too much about the Death Star, so they purged the planet with poisonous gas, which is something that sort of came out through Star Wars Rebels as well. And I can imagine them doing the same thing with Mandalore, where they're just such renowned warriors. Let's get rid of them because they can cause us a problem.
Well, Bo-Katan explains that they're trying to divide them, but Mandalorians are stronger together, which speaks to your previous point. Bo-Katan offers to help him find the Jedi if he will help him with the mission. So again, Brian and Brad, it becomes a mission of the week. Well, I mean, it becomes more integrated than that. But I love this quick shot of Sasha Banks's character slurping up one of those tentacle creatures from the chowder. I don't know. It's just a really cool, fun sci-fi moment. The mission is to steal weapons off the Imperial gun. How do you pronounce this freighter?
It's a Gozanti, a Gozanti class Imperial freighter.
Yeah, we've seen these ships before. I remember seeing them taking off in the background in Phantom Menace on Tatooine, and I think they were in Attack of the Clones. And I like to call them a Dave Filoni special because I think they built the 3D model for them, so they used them a ton in Rebels and Clone Wars.
Yeah, they were in Clone Wars a ton, and they were mentioned in some Darth Maul stuff, and they're all over the place in the galaxy.
So Mando leaves the most important thing in the galaxy with strangers. He leaves the child with frog people, tells him to mind his manners and be respectful. The child is peering into the egg tank, and we see one of the, I want to call it a tadpole being born. I don't know. Maybe it's a little frog creature. I don't know what you want to call it. The ship takes off, and the 4 Mandalorians jetpack onto it and take out the trooper security. Here's where we're introduced to Titus Welliver, who people might know as the Man in Black from Lost. I've recently been watching a lot of Bosch on Amazon, so I'm going to call him Bosch for now.
He's also our third Deadwood alumni this season.
Oh, wow. I didn't even know he was in Deadwood. I have not seen Deadwood. He plays an Imperial officer in charge of this vessel, and he is informed that pirates have made their way on board. And actually, we also get the indication that these pirates are a thing, that like a thorn inside of the remnants of the Empire, or at least in this area, like they've been attacking before.
There's that conversation that they have when Bo-Katan is explaining the plan, where she's like, when the Mando's like, well, we could just sneak aboard as stowaways. And I think it's Costa who says, like, we've been hitting them too hard. They're going to scan the ship before we leave. We have to hit them while they're in orbit, or like in low orbit, because we've been attacking them so much.
Ah, okay. Yeah, that's a good point. He tells them to guard the hull and seal the hatch. Brad, you had a thought about this.
Well, I mean, I feel like maybe it could just be a coincidence, but it seems kind of interesting that the Man in Black from Lost is telling them to seal the hatch.
Yeah, that's a fun theory. I like it. I'll go with it. There's a great shot of the stormtrooper landing on the windshield of the ship. There's this cool hallway blaster fight, but stormtroopers are easy targets, and I think one of the funniest lines is one of the officers on the bridge asking, "How many are there?" And the stormtrooper reports back, "Hard to say, 10, maybe more."
And I love those two troopers, or the two pilots. For one, those pilots, I don't know what it is about how they photographed them or costumed them, but they looked like they walked off the set of Return of the Jedi.
It does, yeah.
They so looked like they nailed that look. And they're like, "There's only 4 of them, sir. Like we're only picking up 4 life signs."
Yeah. So Bosch is told that they're headed for the cargo bay and they're Mandalorians. There's only 4 of them, but they're Mandalorians. This guy is not stupid. He sees what's happening here. He understands what the end game is, and he tells the pilots to climb now so they can get out of the atmosphere, so they can jump to hyperspace, to thwart the plans of the Mandalorians. This is another episode where they built a hallway, and I think they're just reusing the same hallway over and over again, kind of like the prison escape episode. Which is kind of neat. I think it actually works better in this episode than it did the prison escape episode. They close the doors on the Mandalorians approaching the cargo bay, almost like in the climactic moment of episode 1, Phantom Menace, where he's trapped between the things in the mall fight. But they're trapping them in between in the cargo control area, and that's one of the funnest reveals of this episode. Did you guys want to talk about that?
It was just a lot of fun. I really liked how that was designed with the back and forth between the Titus Welliver character and the sort of groveling cargo captain when he's like, where are they trapped? Where you see his gears turning, where he knows exactly what's going on, but the other guy's kind of too foolish to put it together. And it was just a really great reveal. I really love when they do that, where they show us what they're doing without actually having them stand around and go like, "What do we do? I don't know, push those buttons, eject them." Like, we just see the effects of it. It was just really efficient storytelling.
Also, this continues the Mandalorian's tradition of giving minor roles to kind of comedic day players, essentially, because the guy who gets sucked out of the cargo bay, the officer, is Kevin Dorff. And he's a writer who has written a ton for Late Night with Conan O'Brien and The Tonight Show when Conan O'Brien was on it. And he's also appeared in tons of TV shows, from Brooklyn Nine-Nine to Parks and Rec, The Office, and a bunch of stuff.
I also like how they are, like, with this the Bosch lieutenant guy, like, he's not just like a mindless, like, he feels more Thrawn in that, like, he is a thinker for himself. I mean, he's not like Thrawn, like, where he's 6 chess moves ahead of time or ahead, but like, he actually seems like an interesting character. I wish we got more of him in this show, because I love that, like, the him realizing what they're doing as they're doing it kind of dynamic, and I wish, like, we could have that kind of Imperial character in the show more. Usually they're, like, kind of buffoons in a way. Okay, so they close the doors on the Mandalorians approach the cargo bay, trapping them in between. They had that fun reveal where they fly out. The Mandos now have all the weapons. Bosch says, I'm sorry I keep on calling him Bosch, but that's what I'm going to call him. Bosch says that if they plan to escape and the weapon with the weapons, he will hunt them down. Bo-Katan says they plan on taking the whole ship, not just the weapons. So here's where she explains to Mando that there is something she needs if she wants to rule the Mandalorians, something that was once hers, and they now know where it is. Bo-Katan basically changes the terms of the deal here. Mando is really not happy about this. It's not, something.
This is not the way.
Yeah, it's not what he believes Mandalorians do. Mandalorians are. I think we were told in the last episode when the Frog Lady said it, right? Like, Mandalorians are people of their word. So Bosch informs Moff Gideon about the hijacking and asks for immediate backup. Gideon says if they've taken that much of the ship, It's too late, and you know what to do. And I love the long live the Empire. Bosch kills the pilots, sets the ship in a suicide plunge to crash on the planet. The Mandalorians try to make their way to the bridge, but the troops in the hallway have too much firepower, and Mando takes he makes a run for it, throws some thermal detonators, saves the day.
You'll get some email about how those aren't thermal detonators if we don't correct that now.
Are they not thermal? What are they, like grenades?
No, they're just little explosives. Thermal detonators, I think, would have vaporized them.
Good point.
But I loved how he's making that run toward the stormtroopers, and he gets assured that they can't hit the side of a bantha, but like every shot hits him.
I thought what's kind of interesting too is you get an idea of how, I guess, durable the Beskar armor is, because obviously we know it's good, but it operates much in the same way that a bulletproof vest does, where he can take laser shots, but it still hurts and it still has a potential to take him down, because even after making that run, like he's clearly like somewhat injured and exhausted after being shot so many times on his armor.
Okay, so the Mandalorians take the bridge. Bosch won't tell her where the Darksaber is. I'll let you live, but you'll have to take me to him. Bosch commits suicide because he won't. And this is kind of a Star Wars version of like Nazi cyanide pills or something. Like he has like some kind of like tech version of that.
Yeah, it's like an electric charge that like he has in his mouth somewhere that he bites down on, and it just completely fries him.
Well, I just really loved the effect on his face. It reminded me a little bit of the lightning coursing through Vader's face, but more, I don't know, this was more horrifying, actually, somehow.
They save the ship from crashing. Mando won't join them, but the offer still stands, and his bravery will not be forgotten. I think this is interesting in this episode that we're kind of seeing a repeat of what happens in episode 1 with different results. So we have Mando, who encounters what he believes to be an imposter or imposters wearing Mandalorian armor. He's forced to work with them on a mission to get what he wants. In the case of Cobb Vanth, we have a human in Mandalorian armor who shows himself to be honorable. In Bo-Katan, we have a real blooded Mandalorian who shows herself to be less than trustworthy. So it's interesting that there's that kind of like reverse mirror there. That same with the the frog lady from before.
She's also kind of spiteful too, because she even throws back in his face the "this is the way" line in a very snarky kind of way.
Yeah,
I think she gave it to him in a snarky way in the cargo hold, but I think she means it here on the bridge, which I thought was an interesting reversal.
Sorry, I was referring back to the one when she breaks the deal or changes it.
So here's one of the big reveals. She tells him where he can find the Jedi. Take the foundling to the city of Caledon on the forest planet of Corvus. There you can find Ahsoka Tano. Say you were sent by Bo-Katan. So I don't think there's any planet of Corvus in Star Wars canon, at least not that I could find. But there is a mid-sized Raider 2 class Corvette called the Corvus that was used by the Empire and then taken by the New Republic and then eventually becomes occupied by the First Order. But I don't think that's what she's talking about, because she says on the forest planet of Corvus, unless she's like fully doesn't trust him yet. I don't know. Who knows? This next episode is directed by Carl Weathers. Do you think they would give Carl the first appearance of Ahsoka Tano?
I mean, I doubt it. I feel like that has to go to Filoni, and if I'm betting what the next episode might be is that maybe Mando has to go back to Navarro to get his ship like better repaired so that he can actually go to meet Ahsoka Tano and be more fully prepared for that.
Yeah, and Filoni is supposedly directed episode 5. So, I mean, I don't think we have a confirmation on that, but I think it's pretty much people assume
He did write episode 5. Yeah. So we know that we know for sure that he's writing it, and I would guess that he's going to direct that as well.
So I'm kind of wondering, will we see Ahsoka Tano in the next episode? Will it be like what you say, like he has to get a ship fixed, and then he has to go on a mission, get the money to get the whatever, and then like at the end of the episode, he gets there and we see Ahsoka Tano, or will we not see her until Filoni's episode in episode 5? What do you guys
I think that's probably the safest bet, because I wouldn't be surprised if we know that he meets back up with Grief Karga and Cara Dune back on Navarro. We've seen a shot of it in the trailer, and actually it makes sense because the shot we've seen of Mando coming back to Navarro in the trailer has him holding Baby Yoda and not having him in the pram. And since the pram just got destroyed, that makes perfect sense. And more than likely, he probably might even need to do a bounty job in order to pay to get his ship repaired, since it's totally trash. So Grief, perhaps being back in charge of things on Navarro, maybe has a job for him to do so that he can get his ship fixed.
Yeah, it's also interesting that she's telling him where he can find a Jedi, but Ahsoka Tano at this point is not a Jedi, right?
I think that distinction is lost on people who aren't Jedi.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. She's someone with Force abilities, and she uses a lightsaber. She may as well be a Jedi.
So, yeah, exactly. One thing I really loved about this episode is that it feels like it's putting moving pieces in place so that we don't have to, like, these developments can happen off camera, right? Like Moff Gideon, we learn in this episode that he's not just sitting around hunting for the Mandalorian. He's got much bigger plans that he's putting together that all these things are a part of. And he doesn't even know the Mandalorian or the child are involved in this situation with Titus Welliver's character. And we have Bo-Katan hunting him down. And so I feel like, we've got episode 6 or 8 that Robert Rodriguez is going to be responsible for, right? And I wouldn't be surprised if he's got the final episode and it's this big showdown where all these threads are coming together, where we figure out how Bo-Katan was coming into conflict with Moff Gideon, who and we know that Giancarlo Esposito has been around saying he gets to fight with the Darksaber a whole bunch, and now I'm starting to really reel with possibilities that he's going to be fighting Bo-Katan, and they're going to be fighting over the custody of the Darksaber. But that all of this stuff is happening off camera, right? Like the next time we catch up with these characters, they're not going to be frozen in amber, which is something I think a lot of writers fall into that trap where it's like, if it's happening off camera, we don't need to know about it. And they just pause while our hero is off doing his other thing. And I think this is setting it up so that things are going to move and advance absent the Mandalorian, which I think is the right way to handle this show. My worry as they brought in these other elements, whether that's Boba Fett or maybe not Boba Fett or Bo-Katan or Ahsoka Tano, is that they would take over the story, but watching their story play out off camera while the Mandalorian focuses on his feels like the right way to play it.
It is also very interesting that this series is doing that. It's not just about the journey of Mando trying to get the child back to his people or back to the Jedi. There's all these different threads that are being introduced in the season. You mentioned Boba Fett, you mentioned Bo-Katan. We don't know where. I guess Ahsoka falls into the main storyline, and we still have the whole Moff Gideon is after the child. So I feel like they're starting to complicate things a bit, which is kind of interesting. How do you think Ahsoka is going to play into the story?
I think I wouldn't be surprised if it's very much a similar situation to Luke in The Last Jedi or Force Awakens, where she doesn't necessarily want to do the Padawan thing. She's not a Jedi. She doesn't want to rebuild that order. But I think there's a lot of questions having Ahsoka in this part of the timeline asks. For one, does he find her before or after she goes on that walkabout with Sabine Wren to find Ezra Bridger? The epilogue in Star Wars Rebels, where we last saw...
Yeah, we should say spoiler alert for Star Wars Rebels, but okay, go ahead.
There's no date on that, right? That could happen at any point after the end of the war, and so maybe they haven't prepared to do that yet. Or maybe they've already gone and come back and that story's resolved. We don't know where that fits. But also, if Ahsoka Tano's around and people that are involved in galactic politics are aware of her, how does she fit into Luke Skywalker and his training and his journey of training, especially as we know that after the war, thanks to pieces of media, books and Battlefront 2, that he's out seeking any information he can find about the Jedi. Does she come in contact with Luke? Does this open the door to explaining what her interactions with Luke are? And in my view, I think Ahsoka and Luke are as much siblings as Luke and Leia, right? Like they were both, I think Ahsoka is what Luke and Leia could have been had Anakin and Padme been able to raise them, right? Because she had all that influence from Padme and had all that influence from Anakin, and she kind of chose the right. And it asks those questions by putting her in this timeline. And so I wouldn't be surprised if, to answer some of those questions, they have her very much like Luke, sort of like rejecting the dogma of the Order. She doesn't want to train someone new because she doesn't want the Order to exist the way it did. Maybe this is where Luke got some of those ideas that he needed to leave. Maybe that was a seed that Ahsoka planted.
Also, I think that there might be an interesting idea where, not necessarily an interesting idea, but I think that considering that Ahsoka was around during the times of the Clone Wars, and there's a hint that the Doctor from the first season of The Mandalorian has the uniform that references the same symbols that we saw in the cloning facility where the clone army was created and where Boba Fett was born.
Geonosha?
Camino.
Yeah. Or Camino.
Yeah,
sorry,
so that she might know, maybe has more about the child than we think, or maybe she finds out that the facility is trying to do something with cloning again, and maybe that ignites her as like a call to action to like stop, so that something doesn't happen that happened during the Clone Wars before, or something like that. I don't know.
And it's interesting there. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I also wonder, like, you bring up Luke Skywalker, and Ahsoka at this point doesn't consider herself a Jedi. I wonder if that refusal to the call that you're speaking about is not about training. Like, maybe she's like, I'm not a Jedi. There's only one Jedi in this galaxy. You need to find Luke Skywalker. Do you think they'll even touch that? Because I feel like that's getting too close to the Skywalker saga.
I don't know. I didn't think they were going to touch Ahsoka Tano. I mean, I heard it report. I know you reported it, and I know we had conversations about this where I was like, I don't know. I don't know. I just want to wait to see if it happens.
I'm going to do another pat on my back. This episode.
You deserve the.
Yeah, Katie Sackhoff is Bo-Katan. I exclusively reported that, and I reported Ahsoka being Rosario Dawson, which is half confirmed. Ahsoka's going to be in it, but we don't have Rosario at this point.
But that could be part of the mystery that leads off this season, right? They've already been greenlit for season 3. We know it's happening. And, Sebastian Stan's just standing around going like, hey, I'm a period appropriate Luke Skywalker.
For sure.
Anything could happen. And that's what's so interesting about the show, is that it's in this wide open piece of the timeline that we don't know much about, because Force Awakens left so many questions unanswered.
I kind of hated that about Force Awakens when it came out, that like we didn't get much details there, but now it's like the best thing it could have done, right? Because now there's like all those years that we can explore, and we literally, all we need to know, like the only thing that we kind of learned was the rise of the First Order, right? Like we don't really know much in that time period, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, it gives Favreau and Filoni like a really empty canvas, and as long as they can make things make sense as they lead toward those moments, then it'll make sense, especially as far as galactic politics goes. There wasn't anything about Mandalore or anything. I do think it's interesting, that idea that you're talking about, Brad, about how like maybe they're trying to restart the clone thing or something, but having Tamara Morrison involved opens the door to that. Having Ahsoka involved, I think, opens the door to that. I think that opens the door to Rex too. And there is that throwaway line in Force Awakens where Kylo Ren is like, maybe Supreme Leader Snoke should consider a clone army. And, maybe this is, that references back to this, if that ties in.
Bob Iger had that famous line on that earnings call or whatever, where he was talking about how the Mandalorian is going to start to introduce like other characters that could spin off into their own series and movies. And since I reported Ahsoka, I always thought that was what he was talking about, that he was talking about that this is going to set up the Ahsoka series or movie. But now after seeing Bo-Katan, I think maybe there's something there. What do you guys think?
I would love to see a show about Mandalorian politics, and that's, before we knew anything about the Mandalorian, I think I'm on the record somewhere saying that's the show I'd rather see. I'm happy with what we got, but I think Disney Plus chasing that Game of Thrones vibe with the competing houses of Mandalorians is a gold mine, or a Beskar mine, as the case may be.
Do you guys think we're actually going to see Sabine in the season? I know like some people had that was highly rumored because I think of Sasha Banks's involvement in the series, and she had kind of like the Sabine look in her wrestling persona. I mean, we do have the graffiti in that first episode. Do you think do you think it's going to happen this episode? I mean, this season, like obviously Ahsoka, if it could be in the timeline that Ahsoka is with Sabine, right? Like looking for Ezra.
Yeah.
But they didn't get together before that, right? Like it felt like in the epilogue that was like the first time they kind of got together.
So it felt that way, but it was also because in that show, again, spoilers for Rebels, Ahsoka had faced off against Darth Vader and was sort of pulled out of time in the world between worlds and sort of deposited back, stranded in that Sith temple on Malachor. And so we don't know how she got off of that planet. So she was left there. And then when we see her in the epilogue of Rebels, she's shrouded in white in that Gandalf the White sort of symbolism. And we don't know how she got off of that planet. We don't know when she got off of that planet. We don't know if she went straight to Sabine. There's so many unanswered questions as part of Ahsoka's journey that we just don't have enough information to know. And Dave Filoni is willing to tease in the most horrible ways and play with our emotions about it. And even down to, when Rise of Skywalker came out, we all just assumed, oh, well, Ahsoka must be dead by this point of the timeline because we're hearing her voice in the montage of dead Jedi helping bolster Rey. And Filoni was like, not so fast. Like, remember how in Rebels the Yoda could commune with any of the Jedi or Force sensitive people who are sufficiently strong enough in Jedi temples or places of power of the Force from Dagobah, right? So maybe there's just a lot more to Ahsoka's story, and I don't think Dave Filoni is going to let her go without. Does
he ever let anything go?
No, I mean, and the next thing, we'll have some wolves in Mandalorian sooner than later.
Well, isn't Dave Filoni's name as the X-Wing pilot?
Oh, Trapper Wolf, yeah.
Trapper Wolf. So we got that. Brad, who do you think is going to be the spinoff? The first spinoff of the Mandalorian?
I don't know. It's it really, the possibilities are open to be anybody at this point. Like, it's with all the new characters, well, not new characters, but with all the characters they're bringing into the second season of the Mandalorian, any one of them could have a path open to their own series. It's like we talked about on last episode, the rumor was that it might be a Boba Fett series, which would make sense if he is able to get his armor back, or even new armor.
If he gets his shit together.
Literally. What would really be interesting actually is if he doesn't get his old armor back, but if he gets his prototype armor, the white armor that he was originally meant to have. I think that would be kind of cool if he took some stormtrooper armor, was able to turn it into his own or something like that. But I don't know, and seeing Bo-Katan in action this episode made me think, wow, that would be really, really cool. But at the same time, that makes me think that maybe that's what Leslie Headland's series is, because we've heard that it's supposed to be female-centric and involve martial arts, and there was some pretty crafty fighting being done by the Mandalorians in this episode. So the possibilities, they're all there, and I really don't know one way or the other which way it's going to go.
Do you think that we're going to get multiple,
I thought
Star Wars TV series that is led by people in Mandalorian armor?
I don't know. Last week I talked about how I wasn't super into that just because it's like, oh, cool, here's another Mandalorian with a helmet on and bounty hunting, and here's these. But if they're, I don't know, if they're different enough and they have such strong character traits that they don't feel like they're super similar. Like, we've obviously seen how much different Bo-Katan and her crew is from Mando and his people. So as long as it's something like that, I'm not necessarily opposed to it in that way. But it does make me wonder, beyond the Obi-Wan series, how, if the forthcoming Star Wars shows that are on the way are going to be interconnected more. We know the Leslie Headland series isn't, because they explicitly said that it takes place in a different part of the timeline.
Yeah.
But
Obi-Wan can't be connected because it's a different part.
For sure. I wasn't saying that it would, but Bob Iger specifically has said that that they were looking at developing spin-offs from this show. So at the very least, perhaps it'll be a thing similar to the Star Wars saga at large, where we had here's the primary Star Wars saga with the Skywalkers, and then here's some spin-offs here and there that are separate. Maybe we'll have, here's the primary Mandalorian show and some spin-offs that are tied to it, but then we also have these other stories elsewhere in the Star Wars universe.
Well, you think that's one of the things I think that's interesting is I kind of wrote off the idea that there could be other Mandalorian series, like a Boba Fett series or like a Bo-Katan series. Like I really thought it was going to be Ahsoka, because I didn't think that they would do multiple TV series around Mandalorians. But now I'm kind of wondering if Disney is not looking at the Mandalorian as a title in the Star Wars franchise, but instead now a franchise of its own. A Mandalorian franchise, a sub-franchise of a Star Wars franchise. Does that make sense, Bryan?
Yeah, no, that makes sense, and I don't see why. If they're printing their own money with The Mandalorian, right? And I think Kathleen Kennedy knew they'd be printing their own money with a Boba Fett TV show and a Boba Fett movie, and they've tried twice to get that out there. And so the rampant success of a Mandalorian show without Boba Fett is probably telling them that people want Mandos, and why not? Give the people what they want.
Did you guys have any final thoughts on this episode, Chapter 11 of The Mandalorian?
I really liked it. I
really
enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun with it. I mean, I'll be honest, I really love seeing those characters return. I love seeing characters return, and I was just sort of misty-eyed the entire time I was watching this, especially as I saw that Night Owl helmet drop in the first time. Because it was there's only one of 4 people it could be, and it was one of them. And it expanded the Star Wars universe in some ways. It connected it and made it smaller in other ways. And it really advanced, I think. The one thing I don't think we talked enough about this episode was how it sort of advanced or at least juxtaposed the different methods of parenting that the child is exposed to. Mm-hmm. And he actually had an arc in this episode, and it was really fascinating. And I think it had a lot to do with those competing philosophies that we talked about with how the heiress could represent different things.
What is the arc for you? Because we didn't talk about the end scene where the child is playing with that small frog baby in a dish, which I'm assuming is the completion of that arc.
Yeah, I think the arc for the child is sometimes food fights back, right? the him just eating things indiscriminately and then getting in trouble for it is what happened to him last episode. This episode, he's going to dig into the chowder and it starts eating him, and then he's left with the frog family, and they're teaching him compassion, and they're not letting him eat the eggs. They're probably feeding him other stuff, and they're nurturing him through what that cycle of life is like for other species. And he's learning things, right? Toddlers, if he's a toddler, are sponges for that sort of modeled behavior. And so I think we're going to get a more mindful child through the rest of the season.
When Mando tells the child, when he's trying to drag him out of that house at the end, and he congratulates them, and he's like the child's kind of like says he wants like the frog baby thing. He says, "No, I have enough pets." I thought to myself, like, does Mando even have any pets, or is he talking about the child? I guess he's talking about the child, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Brad, any last thoughts on
No,
this
I really
episode?
liked it. You know, I will say, as somebody who is not as deeply ingrained in the animated side of the Star Wars universe, and like, you know, I haven't been, you know, caught up in the immense love that there is for Clone Wars and Ahsoka Tano and Rebels and all that kind of thing. It was still really exciting to see that part of Star Wars mythology brought into, you know, live action Star Wars. And, you know, even people who don't follow that side of Star Wars, I think, you know, will be compelled to be like, oh crap, who are these, you know, cool characters? Just because, you know, Bo-Katan was given an entrance like she was a new character, and like it was like, whoa, this is somebody who is badass, you know. And if somebody somehow doesn't know who Ahsoka Tano is, they'll be intrigued by the mystery of like, where, you know, who is this, and who's this Jedi, and where are they going? So I think it's, while I am cautious about how much you know, of familiar Star Wars mythology and characters they're bringing into the Mandalorian, as opposed to branching out and doing new things, I do think that it is cool how they are connecting to these aspects of Star Wars that a lot of people never thought we would ever see in live action form.
Yeah. Well, Dave Filoni and I guess now Jon Favreau, they're just really good at doing this fan service in a way that it doesn't feel bad. Like all of this could have been bad. Like involving these characters, exploring these things, having, you know, Boba Fett. I guess Brian still is on the edge of if that's bad or not. But but I think I don't know. I think they're handling it really well, and I'm really excited about where this series and this franchise is going. So.
Yeah, no, and I was actually wondering about that. How will this play to somebody who's not into all of the lore and into the animated series? And I wonder if this is part of Disney's strategy, right? Like, just connect things even loosely to itself, so that people are watching more and more Disney Plus. I've had so many people tell me they've been trying to figure out, like, after the Darksaber came out, they're like, oh, I want to look at that. And then they're like, oh, it's been in Star Wars before. And then they start watching at least those episodes. Maybe we'll get the same thing with Bo-Katan.
I almost wish they had, like, you know how HBO does that with like Westworld or Game of Thrones, where they have the after the episode behind the scenes thing. And I almost wish they could have that with these, because I feel like they're missing an opportunity to send these viewers to the Clone Wars and be like, oh, this, because I could totally see what Brad's saying. I could totally see someone who's never seen Clone Wars or Rebels and watches this, and you don't need to know that those are characters from before. Like, but like, I feel like if I saw this in the same way that I'm sure many people saw Avengers, and when Thanos showed up at the end, they're like, oh, I got to go read some comics and find out who Thanos is. And I wish that they would take advantage of that more, but yeah. Anyways, you can find Brian. I'll link in the show notes Brian's piece on this week's Mandalorian in the show notes. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find this podcast on Apple, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. And please send us your feedback, questions, comments, concerns to us at peter@slashfilm.com. Leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention the email on the air. You know, if you saw something we didn't see, some kind of Easter egg reference, have a theory, have speculation, send it to us. If it's interesting, we'll mention it on the air. Please rate and read this podcast on iTunes. Tell your friends. Spread the word. And we will see you on Monday.